All right, Phil, welcome to the podcast. So first, give everyone in your words a little bit of insight to what it is that you do.
I guess the best way to describe me, I mean, I'm a podcast producer and have been for the past 10 years, but in my heart, I'm also a filmmaker, overall content creator. And to be honest, I just also love championing my friends. I think there's a lot of talented people that I know, and I want to see them succeed as much as I want to see myself succeed. So I guess that's the best way to describe me.
When we go through times like COVID and quarantine, do you feel it's harder to find inspiration, or is this the time when you can really focus in on that next project?
I mean, it could be a little bit both, right? I mean, certainly creativity can offer a bit of an escapism, but at the same time, obviously, there's life itself is certainly turned upside down and whatever else. And interestingly enough, I was listening to Brene Brown's latest show, and she was talking about Queen's Gambit. I don't know if you've seen the show, but it's about basically a grandmaster chess player. It's all right. So, I mean, basically the premise is, there's the character and of Beth Harmon, and she's a chess player. And this led Brene Brown, just phenomenal researcher, great thinker. And what she discovered is that chess players on the grandmaster level burn 6,000 calories in a single day, which is more than working out and stuff, right?
A lot.
And what it is. And it's because of they're really working their mind and things like that. And this kind of, she's an interesting woman in the sense that she starts to connect dots. And where I'm going with this
Can I interrupt
is that
you quick? Sorry, I have a question. Maybe I'm, dumb. I had no idea that you can physically burn calories just from thinking. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And, the thing is, most people don't know that. And, she didn't really consider it in that way. And what it led her to really think about is, right now, we are just utilizing our minds so much. So, of course, we're tired. So, of course, things are going to be a lot harder than, quote unquote, they normally are. And so in that sense, it's like, well, no, duh, like we're all having a hard time. And that's the ultimate point. So I think, we have to give ourselves grace in that sense. And, if inspiration strikes, so be it. But at the same time, people think, I think early on, there's a big disservice done to people, especially artists, of like, well, if you don't get your script done now, you were never lacking time, you were lacking motivation. And it's like, based on whose definition?
Mm-hmm.
There's no finish line to this. The finish line is your life.
And rushing the product is not going to be what you want it to be ultimately anyways.
Exactly.
That's a very interesting point, because sometimes I feel like objectively I could be, doing an activity that looks really chill, but I'm still so stressed out in my mind where I have to ask myself, like, why aren't you happy right now? Why are you complaining? Your life is so good. What you're doing is not really that hard. But I came to the realization that, just to like you were saying, my mind is still racing, even if I'm doing something calm. And I realized that was where my anxiety came from, because just because the physical act on the surface doesn't look that demanding, my mind is still in constant motion of what's happening next. And I think a lot of us are like that. It's not, our life is not what we portray on the surface of what's going on in our mind.
Yeah, 100%. And that can be difficult. And part of it, like your life, my life may be okay, but I think we're also, I would say, attuned to, the horrors of the world. So even though, you might be comfortable in things like that and life's great, it's like there's a lot of injustices in the world. Yeah. I mean, just you could throw a rock and, you'll land on any injustice at the moment. And so it's like, it's hard to tune that out, nor really should you tune that out. I'm of the belief we do any sort of work on ourselves so we can also help the world, help ourselves, help the world. It's not just a one-way street of like, oh, I'm good, but whatever. Let the
all
world
relative.
be what it is. Yeah.
And I positioned this question on Twitter where I was wondering if we knew that this pandemic, because of course they told us, a few weeks, maybe a month in the beginning, if we knew in the beginning of March that this would last up into now December, and really who knows how much longer, would we do anything differently? And I liked your response, and I was not surprised that you were someone that you said you studied past, like history of these diseases and outbreaks and crisis. So you weren't at all surprised that we're where we are now, basically.
No, I think I like to look to history because history does present patterns. I mean, I really hate the fact like, oh, this is unprecedented. It's like, really? I mean, it's kind of happened before, multiple iterations of
Mhm.
it. I mean, Marcus Aurelius writes about in, his writing. He was a ruler during the time of like a pandemic, essentially. Uh, but I think also too, I talked to a lot of people and they were like, oh, if only, I would know exactly what to do if we were in normal conditions. And it's like, well, sadly, this is the normal condition. And all you can do is do the best you can. So I think it's worthwhile to revisit the past to learn a lesson, but to berate yourself for a decision you made, let's say in June or May or whatever, it's like, well, no shit, you didn't know.
Mhm.
Because and the fallacy to me is thinking that we ever had control, you
Yes, I
know?
learned that too. It was just
And
this
so
illusion, but we never did.
yeah, and ultimately that to me, like, I think people got to understand, all you can do is really control yourself. And that might sound frightening, but it's actually the most liberating because you start to realize that, we were trying to always, to my end, and I'm making broad generalizations, but I think people try to control the world too much, and it's like just control you,
Mhm.
right? You know.
Yeah, start with yourself and the rest should come into line. But when you responded to my Twitter post, you said that you were a little frustrated with how people didn't take initiative and we could have been in a better spot. So, how do you stay positive? And honestly, how do you not just go around resenting people when you did the right thing and you're doing the best you can? And you, of course, this is a collective effort. We're in the same boat as the weakest links of the people that don't take it seriously at all. So, what do you do to not go crazy?
You got to look to solutions. I really think. I think you know people people tend to complain a lot more than they really need to, and this goes for all levels. But to me, that I mean, I get it. It's warranted, especially right now. So like, but it's the easier thing to do. And for me, it becomes a lot like I start to feel a lot better when I'm like, okay, what can I do? Right. And so you start to look to solutions. And what I started finding, as helpless as I did initially, there are a lot of organizations out there already formed, doing a lot of great work. And get involved in that, and you start to you're not going to like solve all the world's problems, but at least you're doing something about it. And for example, I'll say like, Thanksgiving just came and passed, and a lot of us, some people were alone, some people were with minimal family and things like that, and can feel very isolated, right? But so what I chose to do, it was like, let me make some food, let me get involved and help people that need food, right? And so in that sense, I felt connected because I knew like what I had made, I was never going to meet the family I was going to feed, but I knew that it was going to someone who would appreciate it. And that made me feel connected.
Mhm. So, what is your day to day like now as far as producing and what's changed with the pandemic? What have you still been able to do at home and daily mindset? Just walk me through what we're doing.
A daily mindset. I mean, I'm lucky enough where even before this, most of my work was able to be done from home. Such as like you and I are talking right now. The fact that we can record a podcast and put it out to the world. That's a beautiful thing. But as far as on the grander scale, like you start to kind of look at things and be like, okay, what has true meaning for me? Like, what are the real priorities here? And it's not to, I think it's not to say that art isn't important, but it's not life or death, right? And I think we have to kind of contextualize it in that way of like, where can I add the most value in what I have to offer? And so, in that sense, I try to make a point of, whether it was calling senators and trying to get legislation passed a certain way, or, like I said, donating my time, or, making stuff and whatever else, reaching out to friends and being like, hey, like if you need anything, like, you know, I don't know what I have, but if it's of any use to you, like, you have my services.
Mhm. And from when I met you before the pandemic, anything, I could tell that you were a person that genuinely did care to see other people succeed, and you do hold those relationships that are personal to you very sacred. But do you think you've grown any more in this time that you're going to implement something moving forward when hopefully life is back to normal?
I think I've expanded the circle of knowledge in terms of organizations. Like I said, I mean, initially it can feel very overwhelming. It's like, oh, what can I do and this and that. But once you start researching of, just whatever type of thing it might be, you start to find like-minded people, and then you start connecting with them. So I think the bonds that I formed with people that I had no clue, that existed, I think that will stay and continue to be fostered.
And when you talked about wanting to see the best in people and helping them and just being a supportive friend, what does that really mean? What kind of steps do you take? And are you ever afraid that maybe someone doesn't want help? How do you go if you see a friend that you feel is struggling? How do you approach them in a way that is not too invasive, I guess I'm trying to say?
Part of it is, I mean, it's work. You gotta kind of know your friends, right? And so sometimes and that dictates how you go about it. So sometimes, yeah, it is stepping away and things like that. Sometimes it's just a quick text over a phone call, and allowing people to have the space and just telling them how I'm here for you if you need me. Other times I know, like, sometimes there's like silent warriors that say they're okay, but I know kind of like, stuff's going on, but they don't necessarily want to admit it. So I'll Postmate some food.
Oh, that's so sweet.
You know what I mean? So just to, I think there's so many different ways to help that, like, I think if you just off-put people, not in a negative way, but like in a good way of like, wait, this person actually cares, It could be a fruit basket, flowers, like a nice handwritten card. There's any number of ways to like just do something that's unexpected. That's like, oh, wow, this made my day.
Not to be so cliche, but just to know they're seen. I think a lot of people just don't feel worthy or important. And so I do think those little acts, even if it is like a Postmate, something like that, just to let someone know you're thinking of them, I truly think can go such a long way. And I hope that if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that, the jobs, the money, all of that is important, and it's stressful when we lose it. But it was so interesting to me to see the mentalness of it all, I guess, of just seeing people that were really suffering because they couldn't get those connections. And while it's so devastating, it's also beautiful to see that humans need each other. And if we didn't know before, I hope people that were taking relationships for granted will move forward and appreciate things even more. And I myself, I definitely want to implement those changes, because I've always close with people in my family, but I think I did get a deeper appreciation not being able to see them this year, and just realizing the luxury and the privilege to even ever be able to get on a plane and see them. So it just puts a lot of things into perspective.
Yeah, and I think for me, that's the biggest thing, like, that I just want people to realize is, if we learn nothing from this, that will be the biggest travesty, because then it will all have been a waste. Like, obviously I'm not saying like I chose a pandemic or any of this stuff, but there are lessons to be learned. And if we learn none of them, we've really messed up.
I like that expression a lot too. And I think there's a lot of truth to it. When you put together a piece of work, are you coming from personal experience? Do you completely create a story that has nothing to do with your life, or do your life experiences at all mimic your work?
A little bit of both. I mean, so I wrote a novel that was based on my kind of upbringing in Slovakia, but you start to kind of realize, no matter how much like you even may want to insert yourself into it, you start to realize your life is kind of boring. So you have to dramatize it. And so with the novel, I would say like 20% of it is actually like my experiences, right? And then the rest of it, you kind of extrapolate and so forth. But of course, and now I'm working on this other thing now, there's different representations and whatever else. And it's one of those things, it's a cliche thing in writing, but you have to love even your antagonist. And what I mean by that is anything in life, and this is both a mental thing, people in life, whatever their value is, they never look at themselves as evil. Just to go a complete extreme, the Nazis didn't view themselves as evil human beings. They looked at, we're patriots. Well, sure, it's patriotism taken to an extreme, right? But an otherwise good value. And so in my work, one of the things that I love exploring is that kind of notion that there is no like absolute truth of good and evil. It's based on one's perception. And it's definitely a lot more difficult to write in that way. Because then people are like, wait, so who's the bad guy? I'm like, well, you figure it out.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And did you ever read the book Conversations with God by chance?
I have not, no.
That's kind of along the lines of what it talks about, where it's like one of the saddest things to me actually is when you see US going at war or people fighting, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, each party has the same intention. They're just on opposite ends. So whether I'm attacking you, it looks bad and we look evil from my side, but in my head, oh, I'm defending my family. This is how I was raised. This is how I show love. So it's like we're just showing what we know are forms of love typically to our side. But of course, that it looks like there's a good and a bad, but just like you said, it's really all about perspective. And I think so much of it, which is the most frustrating part, just comes to lack of communication and understanding. I just can't help but think that if like somehow we could get all of these, people connected to war and bigger picture things out of our hand, if we could just get them to understand each other, to be in a room and have a real conversation to find their common qualities or whatever it is, I just think there could be a lot of power in that.
You know what my solution is? And you might think it's bullshit or I'm just like, whatever, throwing it. But I think it's time to let women rule. I really do.
You think I'm going to disagree with that one? Yes.
No, I don't think you're going to disagree, but I don't want to come off as like, oh, bullshit. I look at it like, okay, right? We talked about history in that sense. Men have ruled since the dawn of time.
Yeah,
we're not really that good at it anymore. Right? So why don't let's women have at it, and I think they'll do a much better job. And you know what? Maybe we agree. If they don't, after like hundreds of centuries, then maybe we can rethink things. But you know what? Just
give it a chance. Yeah, I mean that's a great point. It's like insanity of doing the same thing over and expecting different results. And of course, not every man is the same, not every woman is the same, but 100% I would stand by. Let's try something new here because clearly it's not working.
Yeah.
But talk about some of do you have any rituals or non-negotiables? What's something that you do every day that puts you in a good headspace? Or what if you wake up and you're not in a good place? You don't even have a reason. You're just not feeling good that day. What do you do to get out of that?
It's a good question. It's tough for me. Like, I don't have rituals, although I always talk about, like, whenever I give advice to people, I'm like, go back to what worked. And especially right now, like if prayer worked for you, keep praying. If journaling worked for you, keep journaling. If meditate, like I just find people abandon the things that worked for them.
Interesting. We forget too, right?
It is, right? I mean, for me, I'm lucky. Like I have dogs in that sense. So like if there's any ritual that I have, I'm walking them 4 times a day.
I just saw one in the background.
Yes, that's Chloe. And so, I have my walks and things like that. And sometimes, I mean, I guess if things get really bad, I'll go on a bike ride. I really love biking. I used to have soccer, but soccer not right now and COVID times is non-existent. So I guess like, I guess like I opened up, sometimes creativity is a bit of an escape. Although I never try to view it that way, it definitely helps.
Yeah. You strike me as someone that's very disciplined when you say you're gonna work this amount of time or sit down and write this amount of words. I feel like you're the type of person to do it. Am I wrong or right about that?
I mean, yes. For me, it's always about progress. Like I don't set like specific goals in that sense, but it's like, you know what, if I say I'm going to do this, I'm at least going to move the ball forward in some way,
Is that what you would say to someone that just can't seem to get focused or their mind's scattered and they just aren't hitting any of their achievements? Would you just tell them to not make it such a numbers game or a bigger picture, but just are we stepping forward in any way?
Yeah, exactly. I think too oftentimes we make a grandiose thing out of it. And it's like, you know what, just literally like they say, I forget the proverb, but just take that first step. And then once you're there, take that second step. Like why, People are always thinking of like, okay, I'm gonna write the book, and I'm gonna sell the book, and it's gonna be this and this. Can we just write a first sentence?
Yeah.
You know, and we'll go from there. Might not be a great, but it might be a shitty sentence. Sorry,
right.
What was that?
That kind of leads to my question. Do you trust the first step, or do you play the game where you go back and forth and you're not sure if it's good enough, or do you just go with it?
You have to go with it. You really do. So I'm of the belief that we're much better at critiquing work. Like we love it, right? We always criticize, whether we're watching something, whether it's our own. And so that can feel like a negative, but to me, it's actually positive because I'd rather just put down like if I'm writing a novel, let's say, I'd rather put down a bunch of words and just keep going with it. Because I know then I have the benefit of my critical mind to be like, oh, this is garbage. Okay, here's how we fix that. So the faster I can get to a point where I can let my critical mind just assess whatever it is I've written, the better. But it can't happen if it's a blank page.
Absolutely. And there used to be this picture of a fat squirrel in the library of my high school, and it said I'd be unstoppable if I could just get started. And it was a cute little poster, but it always stuck out to me because I really do think a lot of times we stand in our own way. We're literally the one standing in front of us being able to take that first step. And you never know what can happen unless you take the leap. And my last question for you is, as far as resources, books you've read, podcasts that you swear by, what would you recommend to someone listening that needs their help in taking the first step and could use one of these resources?
For artists, I would say the best book is The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. I think is a really wonderful one, and it's really well cited in terms of people having success with it. He's very direct, very blunt, but he's also inspirational. He has one of the best at the end of the book. He has one of the best lines, and I'm going to paraphrase it, so I hope I do it justice. But it's that if you're meant to create something, whether it's a book, whether it's, you being a doctor, whatever it is in life that you're meant to do, if you don't step up to the plate, you're not only robbing me and the rest of humanity, but you're robbing the angels, the creator that made you, and everyone else. And by you taking that step forward, it brings humanity one step closer to the creator, as he says.
I love that. So. And then any other podcasts or things like that you're listening to right now?
For me, yeah, I mean, I really like Brene Brown. She does a wonderful job. Marie Forleo, Tim Ferriss, Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. I mean, I'm like a podcast junkie.
Me too. I love them.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, I mean, we have access to so much in this world that why not take advantage of these resources? And it's like reading, but faster. Not quite like reading, but helps a lot. I've definitely learned so much from podcasts, and I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to plug your website where people can check you out and find out more about what it is that you do and following your work. And let's finish strong this year and pray for better times. They're coming. They
are. But we have to make them that way. They don't just magically come.
We need more people like you. If we follow your example, I think we're going to do okay.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Phil. We'll talk soon.
No problem.
Bye.